The Institute is doing well. We think we're thriving in the midst of incredibly difficult circumstances right now. I think you know what they are. This incredible disruption of the healthcare marketplace following on the Affordable Care Act. All things in the long term that we believe are likely to be for the good, improve our healthcare system. But in the short term, living in a transition from one fundamental way of being able to function, which is the traditional way of fee-for-service model for care, traditional ways of patients finding their way to us and being referred to us, to this idea of population-based management where someone else will steer large groups of patients to one provider of clinical services or another, and that reimbursement will be based on some kind of a budget-based approach, hopefully with the right kind of value, safety, quality incentives built into them. If you're in one or the other, you can figure out how to do it. Having to try to live in the world where 25% of your patients are in one form, 25% are in another, and the other 50% are somewhere in some mixture of those, creates a real challenge because each of these require different infrastructure, they each require different organizational framework, and this is what's happening to the providers of healthcare across the country, and particularly in academic centers with our multiple missions, our need to cross-subsidize between clinical care and research and training is presenting an extraordinary challenge. And I think you also are well aware, any of you heard Vice President Biden talking yesterday about his decision not to run for president, but to devote a tremendous amount of effort to the conquest of cancer based on his family's own story. That federal funding in biomedical research and the overall federal investment in research of all kinds has been declining, and that has always been the mainstay of our ability to support our research enterprise. So there's tremendous challenges out there, but having said that, we actually closed the year in our financial statements in pretty strong shape. Now, pretty strong shape for us would get me fired if I ran most companies. It's a 1.5% operating margin on a budget of about $1 billion. But we went into it having reached an agreement with our bondholders that this year we would be considerably less than that because we have had to transition from a very robust but proprietary electronic health record to this massive system that is being used more and more across the entire country called Epic. A huge effort. All of our physicians and nurses and practitioners have had to figure out how to unlearn one electronic system and learn another one that is very different, not particularly well adapted to oncology care like ours was because we had built it for ourselves. I should say that Epic saw what our system is and will be adopting much of what we had in our proprietary system as the national model for the oncology modules in the system. But this was an effort that is costing Partners Health System, with whom we partnered on this, well over $1 billion, cost us nearly $100 million. And much of that was hitting the budget last year. So despite that, to finish with what ends up being on the high end of our traditional operating margins, I think was a remarkably good turn of fortune for us. And I have to say that a lot of that was the result of the fact that we did very, very well in our unrestricted fundraising, which is the one form of fundraising that we are allowed to count toward our operating statement. With the decline in federal research support, the well-funded investigator, the people you're going to hear from today who are among the best in the world, who despite the cuts in federal funding do get their grants. It's not that they don't get their grants, but the grants no longer pay as much of the full cost of research. So what we used to count on as a need to subsidize the most perfectly funded of our researchers to the tune of about 10%. In other words, if they got every dollar of outside support they could get, we would still need to find 10 cents on every dollar that they spent on their research to fill in the gap, because none of these research programs really support the full cost. That is now 20 cents on the dollar. The difference for us is made up by the philanthropy that so many of you have been so generous in providing. So that was a huge part of our ability to come out of this very trying year with a strong operating statement, which positions us well to go forward. But that's the money. The more important thing is what are you doing with it, and what are we doing with all of this effort, your effort, our effort, and efforts from 4,000 incredible employees. So this year, once again, we came through the year with contributions to the field that by the comments of our external advisory board and a mock site visit team we brought in to prepare us for the renewal of our NCI-designated Comprehensive Cancer Center, our core grant is due this year. They have said that Dana-Farber and the consortium of Harvard hospitals that leads through the Dana-Farber Harvard Cancer Center are the most transformative set of investigators in the country, perhaps the world. That if you look at the newest exciting developments like immunotherapy, this development of these molecules that you read about called PD-1 and PD-L1, CTLA-4, those molecules were discovered here. Their function was largely worked out here. The critical clinical trials that showed for the first time that using this approach of immunotherapy, so-called checkpoint inhibitors, the molecules that are out there now, that clinical trial was led by Steve Hody, one of our investigators, and showed for the first time in patients with advanced metastatic melanoma, but you could say this about almost any form of cancer, that you actually got a significant prolongation in overall survival, not just disease-free survival or progression, but overall survival. The development of these drugs has had Dana-Farber's fingerprints all over it. The use of targeted therapies continues to evolve and to work through some of the hard lessons we've learned with them, that you can get tremendous, gratifying short-term results, but tumors become resistant. The work on resistance mechanisms led by people like Levi Garraway in our Center for Precision Medicine, something we were able to actually found and support with philanthropy, have made some of the most insightful observations there and laid out the ground for new strategies for treatment using the right combinations of therapies to get around the ability of tumor cells to evade the treatments that we give them. We opened tremendous new space. We're going to eventually be occupying 4 floors of the new Longwood Research Center, which, if you've been over on our campus, is located on the corner of Brookline Avenue and Longwood Avenue. In fact, it's a good thing. It's a very attractive building. It is made possible in no small measure by the Belfer family, for whom we have named our part of the building. And it's the reason it's so important that it's such an attractive building is that if you drive to the corner of Longwood and Brookline, you're going to sit there for a very long time. Any of you who've been there, so you might as well have something nice to look at. And it's nice to see the Belfer name up there, very visionary supporters of ours. We opened our molecular cancer imaging facility. This is down in the south side, toward the south end of Boston, on the waterfront, so-called dry dock facility, space that we leased from the city a number of years ago because we felt that we should be part of the effort to revitalize the city down there, and also because there are things we can do in that space that would be very difficult to do in a much more crowded and expensive space in Longwood. And one of them is to create novel ways to be able to image tumors in small animal models. So We have down there just about every device that you would find in a major academic center for people. MRI, PET scans, CT scans, a cyclotron to make these short-time isotopes, radioactive isotopes that have a very short half-life that allow you to image not just where the tumor is, but how its metabolism is functioning, how it's responding to drugs. It's already a facility that is in great demand. And we expect we'll be able to partner with biotech and pharma companies to do studies in these animal models that really can't be done anywhere else. It's certainly, excuse me, in this region. If you come to our campus, you've seen that we've expanded and modernized the Jimmy Fund Clinic for our pediatric patients, that we've completely redone the first few floors of the Dana building to create a very good environment for our physicians and scientists and staff with expanded and renovated and modernized office space, gathering spaces on the first floor. So we have tried very hard not to let the difficulties that are in the external environment slow us down, but instead sort of motivate us to be even more aggressive, because patients are getting cancer every day. This disease is not going to wait for us to find the ideal environment in which to pursue our research. We're going to do it just as hard and just as fast, even if the environment's tough, because that's what we owe to our patients, to the public, and to so many of you who support us. So the Institute is thriving. We'll be facing tremendous challenges going forward. Our model of care is great, but it's also expensive. These new health reform mechanisms put a very high premium on low prices. Low prices may not always translate to the lowest long-term cost of care, but that's what can be measured, and that puts places like ours at a disadvantage, because we may have higher unit prices, but we utilize those expensive services more judiciously than most places, and because of our expertise, patients tend to have fewer complications. Actually, there's increasing evidence that survival advantages may come with being at comprehensive cancer centers like ours. But those are longitudinal, long-term kinds of things for which the metrics aren't out there. So our challenge will be to continue to be able to grow clinically as a cancer center, even as we have to go through these transitions where the metrics by which we're being measured may not always be the ones that advantage us the most. But we've created a chief quality officer position, very ably filled by Dr. Joe Jacobson, and a team around him, both physicians, nurses, and administrative experts who are working us through that. So while I think it's going to be very difficult, I remain very optimistic about the future of the Institute and about our opportunity to continue to make very positive impact on the outcomes for cancer patients. So again, I just want to thank you all, both on behalf of the Institute, but also personally, because every year I get to make new friends here and new acquaintances, and have a chance to appreciate the many things so many of you do for so many good causes. And it's a real privilege and honor that you've chosen to put your time and energy and support toward us, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that you will regard that investment of yourselves and your resources as the best that you could make.